Amen. All right, there's our outline. We're going to talk about the barren fig tree. This is an interesting miracle. If there is a unique miracle, this is it. It is a curse. Jesus never cursed things that we're aware of. This is the exception in the curse. There are a few occasions when Jesus has brought judgment proclamations against certain cities, etc., but to actually use the power of God, and it actually is a miracle in a curse form, is very unique to this particular occasion. It's the only occasion we have in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John that John does not record this, where such a thing occurs. Because of that, it not only becomes a unique miracle, but it beckons several questions that I'm afraid that have often, I think a lot of times, have been misunderstood, or conclusions have been made that are wrong, just flat out incorrect. To actually get to the bottom of this, we've got to look at a little bit at the incorrect teaching to get to the correct teaching that we must get from the barren fig tree. So let's actually read a little bit here just to get started. Now, Matthew's account is very short. The other account is a little bit longer than this one. But we're going to start here with Matthew, and we're going then, of course, to talk a little bit about what it doesn't mean. There are some times that we have to look at it that way, because if we can understand what it doesn't mean, then it leaves us with only a certain amount of options as to what it actually does mean, as far as what Jesus accomplished here. So let's start with, in the morning, as he was returning to the city, he became hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it, but only leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. And then we have Jesus cleansing the temple for the second time. Isn't this a strange occurrence? Now, what it doesn't mean. First off, Jesus doesn't do things because he's hungry. It doesn't mean that. You know, we might do something because we're hungry, and it might be foolish, whatever it may be. We get really hungry and we think, well, you know, we could be reasonable, or this is me talking, I could be reasonable. I don't talk about you. Maybe you are reasonable. But I think to myself, well, I'm hungry, and what is there to eat? And really, I don't care what it is. You know, open the refrigerator, let's find that, and whatever it is, I'm going to eat till I'm not hungry. We allow our feelings to control us sometimes to a certain extent. So instead of eating in moderation when we're really hungry, we have a tendency to overeat or eat something that's not very healthy for us, etc., etc. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but that's the human viewpoint. You see that's something that occurs with us. If you want to binge eat, if I want to binge eat, that's your business. Go ahead, you know. It doesn't make that much necessarily that big of a deal. Now, of course, you can overdo it to the point where maybe it does you harm, but as a general rule, we don't go that far. We just eat stuff we shouldn't eat. So the bag of chips is there. We don't really have anything else in the house. Slap it on, lay it on the table, and here we go. And we're okay with that. Some contribute what Jesus did only to his hunger. That makes no sense with Jesus. You see that? Jesus doesn't ever do anything without purpose and design, no matter what it is. He also was always in control. If you say that he's not in control, what are the implications of that?
That he's not who he is.
That he's not who he is. Okay, you see, we can't go there. And that's very important because Matthew and the other account, I think it's Mark's account, does not tell us anything about exactly what he was feeling. It doesn't tell us that. It doesn't go into any explanation. Both of them start out with the idea that he's hungry. Okay, everybody gets hungry, and obviously he got hungry. It says so as he was returning to the city. Now, the other curiosity, and we need to go to the other account, so let's skip this a minute and go over here. Mark's account. On the following day, when they came to Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it and found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs, and he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. So there's our second account. And that's all we have on the fig tree. So for the first aspect of this, let us realize that Jesus didn't curse the fig tree just because he was hungry. I don't accept that because there are complications to that. The second idea is he didn't have anything against the fig tree. You know, I mean, what would Jesus have against a fig tree as far as the tree is concerned? Who cares whether it's producing or not producing? It's a tree, you know. And it doesn't have the cognitive ability, trees don't, to have the cognitive ability like humans to decide things and do things and here and there. Okay, trees do what they do when they do it. And so to blame the tree in this doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. It's not the tree's fault. So I don't like the idea of some commentators who offer the idea that the fig tree did something wrong. And I'm kind of like, well, you know, I think they get the impression because you see it didn't have any figs. But then Mark's account tells us it wasn't the time for figs. Now, the curiosity of the fig tree that we're talking about, that we do know enough about it to realize that normally the fruit would come on before the leaves. So that's why when Jesus looked at the tree and it had leaves on it, if it was functioning in a normal fashion, then it should have already had fruit on it and the leaves then come out. That's the way this particular fig tree functions. And so when he saw the leaves, that gives an indication that the fruit has already come on, even though it was not the time for fruit. So that beckons a couple interesting questions we'll deal with in a moment. The other thing is, does Jesus take out his frustrations on creation? There's an interesting question. Again, I say that's not the case. He doesn't take out his frustrations, you see. He may be frustrated about a variety of things in life. One of the things we realize is he's going to his death, burial, and resurrection. But he never became frustrated about it in the sense that we would. We get frustrated and we do things we're not supposed to do. You hear people doing this all the time. They get angry, push their fist through a wall, and they're wondering why their fist hurts. You know, or they break their hand or their foot or leg because they kicked something they shouldn't have kicked. Out of their anger, out of their frustration, out of their inability to control themselves for whatever reason when they should control themselves. We as humans have this problem. It is in a way connected to sin, even though those things may not be sinful in themselves. But because we don't control ourselves, we get ourselves into all kinds of trouble. We're driving along, we're frustrated, and so the answer is 85 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone. We don't control ourselves. Then we're surprised, right, whenever the policeman stops us and says, "Do you know how fast you were going?" No, we're not surprised. We got frustrated, we got angry, we got whatever, and so we moved on, you know, and everybody else does it, right? Yeah, but I'm the one that got caught. And then we're mad, you know, and upset and all this kind of stuff. This is the human tendency, and it is very common amongst us. It's not common to Jesus. So he doesn't take out his frustrations on the wind. He doesn't take out the frustrations on a storm. He doesn't take his frustrations out even on people, you see. If that were the case, then if we use maybe a kind of a ludicrous example a little bit, but yet I think a valid example, we have 10 lepers. They're all healed. How many come back? One. Okay. And Christ says, okay, leprosy, back to the 9. Boom! I'm going to take care of them. Why? They didn't come back to say thank you. Notice, Jesus never, ever, ever, ever does that. That is outside his character, and it's outside of truth. Those 9 remained healed, you see. They did not come and do what they should have done. But Jesus is not ever vindictive. If he was, he'd call the 10 legion of angels and be done with it. He didn't have to put up with the death, burial, and resurrection. He said, no, I'm not doing that. 10 legions, come on, we're finished, I'm going home. Why should I die for these people who don't give a hoot about me? And yet that's exactly what he did. So it's outside his character, you see, in any sense that makes him the deity that he is, for him to take out his frustrations in a way that is not godly in every single instance. And of course, then we learn something from that. Dan?
I think he wouldn't enter into his mind about being frustrated. I think he was looking for something that he knew there was something ahead, that a lesson that the disciples needed to hear.
Okay, and that's what we're going to get to, is the fact that if we get out of the way, the things that it can't be, then it only leaves you with one option, basically. And the option may not be fully explained to us in this passage, but at the same time, it leaves us with an option that is much more reasonable, I think, to the whole picture. This passage is misused by a lot of people to say, well, see there, if I get angry, I can curse people. I better watch out what you're using as curses. Okay, we don't curse people. This passage is even used by some to say, see there, you can use curse language. Whoa, where are we going with this? Nothing in this passage would warrant the human behaviors or the human attitude that comes from what is initially apparent in the passage itself. So let's come back and try to make a little sense out of what I think is in some ways very simple, but it seems to make better sense. The fig tree, the whole fig tree episode, in its own little way, though it is not a parable, it has kind of an ulterior parabolic meaning to it. Like Dan pointed out, when Jesus does something, especially miracles, something we've learned about miracles, miracles always have a point and they always have teaching. He never does a miracle without teaching something in the miracle in some way, or having the opportunity to do something with the miracle that would benefit the people in a real sense. This is no exception, even though it is definitely a curse to the fig tree. So we have before us, or behind us, if you will, in our study, Jesus' triumphant entry, which we did last week, and now we're coming up on the second cleansing of the temple, and also the death, burial, and resurrection, and we're about 6 months out from that, if even that, probably more like 5, something like that, if that. And we have the situation occurring where he is weeping over Jerusalem. And in our study of the triumphant entry, we even noted his prediction, as he does in Matthew 24, which we're coming up to, of its destruction and all of the things that are going to transpire in the removal of the Jewish system under the Old Testament and the issuing in of the Christian age through the death, burial, and resurrection. All these things are symbolic of this tree. So you have Palestine in this picture, and this is my assertion, if you will, because I don't see there's very many options, really. But you have Palestine, as you see, that has leafed out. Now, I'm going to offer this as an example. Palestine has leafed out. We're the people of God. We're following God. We're waiting for the Messiah. Look at how righteous we are. And we've been seeing this throughout the study. And Jesus, throughout the study, has been trying to draw them back, you see, to what is righteously correct. But they won't have any of it. You have the triumphant entry where they're making all kinds of assertions, Hosanna on the highest, not only for Jesus to weep, because he knows exactly how they're going to respond. Their response is going to be, kill him, because he's not the Messiah that they want to have, or the king that is going to be an earthly king. Now, in our study, when we get to the cleansing of the temple, we even see this further because they question him again about his messianic message. And he doesn't respond the way they want him to, so they're upset because it's not what they want instead of what God wants. Here we have, very simple, we have Palestine. It's all beautiful in God's eyes, but what is it? It is bearing no fruit. It has no fruit on it. It's showing that it has fruit. It's saying it has fruit. It goes right back to the Sermon on the Mount. The Pharisee standing on the street corner, great show, all his philanthropies long, his best clothing on, praying to God. And Jesus says, you're praying to yourself and your reward is yourself. You're not getting anything from God because it's all show. There's no substance to your religion. He does the same thing with fasting, with those that were disfiguring themselves, and so on and so forth in the Sermon on the Mount. This illustrating of how unbelievable the religious people of the day had become, as far away from God as they could possibly be. But up to this point, they are still the chosen people, and they are still following the old law to some extent. And and God gives them the opportunity to repent and change their way. Jesus comes to it, there's no fruit. What is God going to do with it? Palestine and the people of God. Well, at the death, burial, and resurrection, they're going to be cursed. That's what's going to happen. Because they will not follow their Messiah. And so what happens to Israel? Well, we know what happens to Israel. The prediction of Jesus is absolutely clear. In AD 70, they're going to be utterly destroyed because of their lack of belief in God. Jesus himself asserts that in Matthew 24. So we have this as a kind of a parable miracle. And it's going to teach the disciples something that they really need to learn. They took note of this. As we read the rest of the accounts, we're going to see that there's little excerpts about the tree a little bit further, with the idea that after it was all done and they came back from Jerusalem after the cleansing of the temple, they came back by and they noticed it was not only dead. How dead was it? You see, it was completely dead. There was no root activity. It was gone. It was literally just died and withered completely away. That's what the curse of God does to those that will not follow Him. It can't do anything else. That's what it automatically does. When you don't follow God, you're accursed. It's one way or the other with God. So we have the fig tree as a prime example of that, and only example that we have where Jesus curses. It's also ironic that the control, instead of lack of control, you actually see more control here than we could possibly imagine. Would Jesus, we could ask certain hypothetical questions, and I think each one of them has their own value. Would Jesus be wrong as who He is and God to have cursed the Sanhedrin? See, He wouldn't have been wrong. They were evil. He as God and with authority could have done that. You see, He could have killed them all with a simple word. Now, of course, we appreciate the fact that He's not going to do that. He has no intention of doing that. They're going to suffer their fate as history progresses. But He could have. You see, He had the ability to curse anyone He wanted to curse. As much as He had the ability, with our study of Zacchaeus, to save him. You see. So Jesus, with the authority, could have said, nope, I'm done with them. Boom. Okay, well, instead, He only gives the apostles an illustration. Nothing more, nothing less. It is the curse of the fig tree that is that illustration. It is issuing in the fact that when the death, burial, and resurrection occurs, which we're going to see more about as we get closer to it, we're going to see more figures that offer this same kind of idea, that will be the dividing point between the righteous and the unrighteous. The death, burial, and resurrection itself. Those who obey the Lord and are baptized for forgiveness of sins will find the pleasingness in God. Those that do not will be cursed. There is no in-between when you come to the picture of the fig tree. Your thoughts? Now I'm going to go back here a minute.
He has the strength and the ability to raise up the dead. Humans, I can see Him killing a tree. I'm not going to kill a human, I'll kill the tree.
Yep. And one word.
Now, look what I can do.
One word.
Not as a grandiose thing, but this is the full spectrum of my ability.
Well, and recognizing the power here. I mean, I can kill a plant, but it doesn't happen like this. You know, I mean, and man can do all, but what did Jesus say? No one will ever eat from you again. Well, it has no purpose now. You see, all of a sudden this tree has no purpose because Jesus says, no one will ever eat a fruit from you again. So what does it do? It has no purpose now. So it dies. There's nothing left. It's indicative, if you will, of souls, if you will, that say, I won't bear fruit. I'm not doing what you want me to do. I'm not living the way you want me to live. And so, what's my purpose? I don't have a purpose anymore. And that's, unfortunately, mankind that is unsaved altogether. They have no purpose. We don't realize that living life is not a purpose without the Lord. That's the thing. You can live life, you can be alive, you can go to work, you can raise families, you can do all these things on earth, but it still has no purpose in the eyes of God. There's nothing there. It doesn't mean anything without Him involved in it. What is life without the Lord? Well, according to God, nothing. It has no reason. It doesn't exist.
Just thinking about it, this symbolic cursing of the tree, does that have anything to do with Him dying on the tree?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know what it would mean with Him dying on a tree and a connection to the fig tree itself. I really can't figure out in my mind how you would connect it necessarily.
Oh, well, I couldn't connect it, but it trees.
There is a tree and a tree. That's true. Eileen, do you have a thought?
Well, I kind of did, but you kind of answered it.
Okay.
So it just had to do with, then the Israelite people, there was no purpose to them anymore.
See, there you go. Let's go down that road just a little further, because yes, that's where I was leading. And my brain's a little funny tonight, so that's all right. It's not something unusual. I'm glad you all put up with me sometimes. But it is. It's indicative of that. When the people of Israel have a purpose up until when, you see, everything from Sinai is coming to a conclusion in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That's why He said in the Sermon on the Mount and other places, I've come to not get rid of the law, but to fulfill it. Now, when it's fulfilled, what is their purpose? He said they had a purpose before. They have a purpose right now when this is even being written. But what happens when the death, burial, and resurrection occurs? See, there's no longer a purpose for their existence.
So the old covenant, because it's gone, then that's why they...
And so there's nothing left. There's no religion. Now they can profess it all they want to, but it's not. It doesn't exist. It's not there anymore. So in the face of God, He has no connection. I mean, there's nothing there anymore. And so if we're going to have connection, then you come to Christ through the Christian process, which is, of course, preached the first time on the day of Pentecost. So we become a part of the plan of God, and we have a purpose. They have no purpose. There's no design to it. But you see, not only they, but the sinners have no purpose. There's no purpose to their existence, really. And that's also, isn't it interesting, if you look at people in general, and we all go through this, at different times in our development as people, we all ask the question, why am I here? What's my purpose? Okay. Now, if we find something, whatever it may be, to cling to, then we pursue that. You know, we'll pursue that and call it a purpose. If it's Christianity, if it's true Christianity, then we have a purpose. But a lot of people never find the purpose. You see, that they find that whatever they thought was the purpose isn't really the purpose. Is the purpose to make lots of money? You see, well, a lot of people think so. A lot of people think that that's the purpose. It'll make me happy. It doesn't make them happy. Well, then the purpose is to get married and have children. Okay? That'll make me happy, right? I mean, you know, and really, I understand the happiness of having a family. Well, I've had one, and I'm very happy with it. But at the same time, there are a lot of struggles in that. You know, you don't just. One of the biggest lies when you're doing marriage counseling is add 3 or 4 children to it, and everything's going to be better. That's the biggest lie, because you see, what you do is you complicate your world even more. Now, and it's not that it's not a blessing. It's just that you're not, you know, and the other lie is that 3 can eat the same on the same amount of money as 2. I wouldn't say so. If you believe that, then I'll send Timothy over to your house for a while. Okay? You'll find out real quick that your refrigerator doesn't have anything in it. Tim.
Mo says on YouTube, where does it say that Jesus cursed the tree? It says he looked at 3 different translations and did not see the language of him cursing the tree.
I don't know what the word curse is used, but I don't know what you would call it otherwise.
Well, what you were saying just a minute ago, I mean, he didn't stand there and curse like the tree like we would think, but he said, may you never have fruit again. So
may you never have fruit again is the statement.
That would be the curse.
That would be the curse, yeah. in a sense. It is a proclamation of the fate of the tree. What is the proclamation? You will never have anyone eat from you again. Now, that would be the strongest language that the Lord could possibly assert to this tree, because it removes the tree's purpose. There is nothing left.
In regard to the figs, no seeds. In regard to Israel, no seeds of repentance.
Yeah, no seeds of repentance, no fruit born. Nothing's there. It's void now. If I don't want to go down that road too much further, but I find it ironic that when you deal with life, all of us have to. Our modern age may not think this anymore, but all of us are supposed to work, and that's why we eat, and we, so on and so forth. We live. It really struck me today, because I don't know if any of you have been paying attention. Maybe you did, but Mr. Shatner got shot into space. He was the Star Trek big, space guy. Anyway, he got shot into space, and it was a big to-do, and it was kind of fun to watch. And these people went up into space. How would you spend $250,000? Has any of you ever spent $250,000 in 10 minutes? Because that's how long he spent up there. It costs $250,000 per person. They're booked way out with people that want to go into space. I sat there and pondered that a moment, and I thought, wow, are you so wealthy that that doesn't impact you at all? And obviously it doesn't. That's what they wanted to do. It's their money. They can do what they want to with it. I don't care about that. But I don't see that it satisfies. You see, there's no. But this is the way we think sometimes. We think that. We work all our lives until we're all wore out, and then we say, well, when I retire, I'm going to work for the Lord. Guess what? When you retire, you're too tired to work for the Lord. I've seen it all my life. When I retire, but no, then I want to go fishing, and then I want to go hunting, and then I want to go climb a mountain, and then I want to go do this, and then I want to go do that, and I don't want to serve the Lord, and you can't even do that because you're too tired. You worked your whole life trying to get to wherever you're at so that you can be comfortable. And you can go down a list that's quite endless, with everything man has tried. If you really want a list, just go read Ecclesiastes. Solomon tried it all. Everything, and he really did believe that having an abundance of children would make him happy. He's had 700 some odd of them, or however many of them there were, but it didn't. It didn't satisfy anything. And in the end, he comes to the conclusion. Keep God's commandments. That's chapter 12. That's the end of the book. And the whole point is, what is life, really, without a commitment to God? It doesn't have a purpose anymore. So we have that as part of the fig tree. Right, go ahead.
The fig tree also was a fruit tree, and evidently this probably doesn't have anything to do with anything, but evidently this tree was supposed to bear fruit. I don't know if every fig tree bears figs every year, but this tree, it showed all intentions of being a fruit tree.
Yeah.
And he went to it to see, and it didn't have fruit. So sometimes we will do that too. We might appear to be a fruit-bearing tree some way, and then when he checks us out and we're not bearing fruit, then he says, in those days, why are you still here?
Yeah.
You need to bear fruit.
Well, and from this you can derive all kinds of interesting lessons. There was a time when I wrote a sermon, I went back and found it actually, and I thought, I'm not going to preach this because I don't believe it anymore. But there was a sermon that I once wrote where I said, you see there, if you're not being evangelistic and bringing in new people constantly, you're not bearing fruit. Now, where that has a measure of truth, where we as a congregation should be evangelistic and bringing in new people, I'm not arguing that. But that's not the only kind of fruit we bear. Okay, and that's where my sermon was wrong, is where that it left the impression that everybody has to be little Apostle Pauls. Well, guess what? There was only one, and I'm not one. But the curiosity of it still is, it doesn't neglect the fact what the church's purpose is. It is, of course, to seek and save the lost. We wouldn't argue that for a minute. But it also, I remember I finally learned, maybe just by time, also a few people helped me along that journey, that if you're losing as many people in the church as you're gaining, then you're not bearing fruit anyway. Just because you're swapping bodies, okay, is it not just as important to support those that are, to keep them as faithful as they can be, because that's also keeping the fruit healthy, keeping the fruit going. So, and because everybody has a different gift, not everybody can be the way I am. And you're not supposed to be. Your intent isn't even that way. But your support of someone else, whether they're weak in the faith or maybe new to the church or whatever it may be, is as vital, and maybe even more so in some cases, than the person that has the ability to bring somebody in all the time. All of its fruit, if it's serving God and it's moving in the direction of the kingdom and it's supporting the kingdom's process, then that is a form of fruit bearing. What Jesus is saying of Palestine here is they ain't got none. There's no fruit at all. They've closed their borders. They don't have any recognition for anybody. They don't even have recognition for themselves. They don't have anything. Okay. But then you see we have other parables, which we've one or two we looked at, like the vine and such, and pruning it, and so on and so forth, because it doesn't bear fruit. We know that vines bear better fruit when they're pruned properly. Okay. Well, we could add, sermons. When you work on sermons, you look at different passages. But in Hebrews 10, it says God disciplines us for our good. You see, what's He doing? He's pruning us and preparing us and keeping us ready and sharp to do the Lord's will and saving souls and keeping people saved and so on. I mean, each one of these things is a form of fruit. Jesus is simply saying here, they haven't got any fruit whatsoever. It's just gone. There's nothing left. And there are times when Christians do that as well. They're not helping anyone. They don't care to help anyone, whether it be in the church or outside the church. They don't want to influence anybody. They're just bodies in a chair, And only God knows this, but they're not bearing anything. And so what is their purpose? They don't have any purpose. And very often what you end up finding is when you get to that stage, which you can almost see it happen when you've worked for the church as long as I have, when you finally get to that stage and they don't have any purpose anymore, then they're gone. There's no reason for them to stay anymore. And you can go visit them and you can look at, because I feel that you should. You go visit them and you talk with them and you work with them. Well, what's happening? They're not interested. It's gone. It's just completely, it's burned up. There's nothing left. They have no intent on coming back or being active or anything else. The fruit's gone. There's no activity left to them whatsoever. Debbie.
This is probably just incidental, but I was just thinking, we're talking about the symbolism of the fig tree and everything, and I just wondered if maybe there's a slight connection to the fall in the garden and the fact that they used fig leaves to try to cover their nakedness, and that wasn't adequate.
Yeah.
To cover that, and so they needed God
provided them
a suitable covering. And I know it's just symbolic, but we're talking about if the fig tree is symbolic of the law or the religion of Jerusalem, then it's not adequate to cover what the people needed.
Well, this was the thing, even with the example I used from the Sermon on the Mount with the Pharisees praying on the street corner. They would clothe themselves beautifully. They were eloquent. They were really eloquent people. They were not dumb. They were highly educated. It's not like they poets and all this stuff, and they could talk for hours, on a street corner and sound wonderfully. And you come to the end of the Sermon on the Mount and they're saying, Lord, Lord, look at all the marvelous things we've done for you. And Jesus says, I don't know you. The problem was they hadn't cleaned what was inside. They had all the externals out clear, and look what we are, but that did not help them. There was no fruit inside them at all. And it all withered away. There was nothing left to them. In contrast, you might put Nicodemus there. He still had something going on. He wouldn't have asked the Lord to come to him if he hadn't, and he wouldn't have been there at the cross if he hadn't. There was still some fruit being born. But these are the people that had any fruit. They became Christians. All right, let's clean the temple real quick. And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." How barren was the worship in the temple. Notice Jesus' words. Now, we have some pictures that people have tried to paint of what took place in the temple. I don't know how accurate all of it actually is or isn't. But clearly, by Jesus' words, by the latter part of it, what was it like?
Den of robbers.
A den of robbers. You see? It was not the Old Testament godly worship. It just didn't exist anymore. Were they still doing sacrifices? Yes. Were they still doing the outward display of what the old law said? Yes. But what was going on inside? Greed. That's what was going on inside. Now, of course, we might be able to say that it was those who were administering everything going on in the temple. I can agree with that. Not every worshiper falls into the category of den of robbers. When he comes into the temple, though, it was so full of commerce. That's what it ended up being. You walk into the temple, and that's all there was all this commerce, selling the pigeons and selling the animals, and the money changers, changing money from one currency to another currency, and on and on and on it went. And all of it was geared to make the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those in control richer. It was not intended to serve God in any way. There are some historical evidence that they pilfered it from the treasury. They did all kinds of things that they shouldn't be doing in the temple. Jesus comes in, and as the Messiah, he cleanses it. He turns it over. And Matthew really doesn't record anything else much about this, but the other writer, Mark, actually does. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. Now there's an interesting verse. Why?
It was holy, and they're taking all of their greed through it.
Yeah, they were walking with all their greed and all of their things through the temple. And he wouldn't let them carry it. Wouldn't have it. It's a place of prayer and holiness. And he was teaching them and saying to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a den of robbers." And the chief priests and the scribes heard it and were seeking a way to destroy him. A great deal of the crowd felt about everything that the Pharisees and Sadducees were doing in their money changing.
Oh, they got caught.
They got caught, and they did not like it. The people knew they were being extorted. They knew it was wrong. They knew how bad it was. They couldn't do anything about it. Jesus was doing something about it. So how deep are the Pharisees and Sadducees' anger toward him? They wanted to destroy him. Look what's going to happen, you see. It shows you a little bit more of the many things we've been talking about within the hearts of these people. Deb.
Just another little aside, but the digging deeper lessons that some of us are going through is kind of like setting up the scene of the last hours, the last things that Jesus says before his crucifixion or before his death. And, one of the main points of the first lesson is that Jesus went to the cross on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It was the plan all along. And in reading all of these things that are leading up, especially as we get closer, because we're getting very close to his arrest and crucifixion, he just seems to get a little more feisty. That's my
Well,
but I mean, turning over those tables and all of the woes, of the scribes and Pharisees that he's going to do, and just some of the things like, tell us why you have all this authority, or sorry.
Well,
but just
and
like his answers, are like, I'm not going to tell you unless you tell me this, and
well, and it's clear that as he gets closer to the death, burial, and resurrection, and as he makes it more plain what's going to occur, there is a bit of inciting them to the point of what happens. That's the whole intent. And he puts it together because on the other side of it, you have him being able to drift away into the crowd.
yeah.
Okay, because it
It's
isn't
not his time.
because it's not his time. But everything's leading to the time. Yeah, everything's moving in that direction, and this event does as well.
You know what's funny about people? When I was in basic training, we called our drill instructors putting the tags in our uniforms that they were writing us up for. And they were so mad they got caught, it didn't stop them from throwing all of our beds and all of our uniforms out the windows. And
Yeah.
we got written up and we didn't have the stuff back in inspection order in 15 minutes.
Yeah,
And it just goes, that's human nature.
it's the way oftentimes we're treated. Yeah. All right, let's look at Luke's account of the temple account. Luke does not record the fig tree, but he does record the temple account. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on to his words. So at this point, the people are still so enthralled with what Jesus is doing, which is intentional in every way, that the Pharisees and Sadducees, they're afraid. They can't do what they would normally do. And of course, it goes right back to what Debbie was saying, the idea that this was planned, it's all by design, this wasn't his time, but so we have these events unfolding. They would have killed him right then if they had the opportunity. It was not the time, what the opportunity quite yet. So he takes advantage of that to clean the house. Notice he calls it a house of prayer. Kind of interesting terminology. You could call the temple a lot of things. You could call it the house of sacrifices. But that's a form of prayer. You see, if you go to the Old Testament, the aroma goes up before God. Does anyone remember what often is said in the Old Testament about it? Sweet aroma. Sweet aroma. What are we talking about? Prayer, you see. When you take the blood into the mercy seat and the high priest would lay it in the mercy seat, what happens? Goes up before God. It's the house of prayer. The actual article of the incense, Hebrews tells us, it is the prayers. You see, it is a house of prayer. Now, in the house of God, then, in prayers takes, in the Old Testament, takes various forms, as is indicated by all the symbolism of the articles in the temple. In the New Testament, we pray. Is this the house of prayer? But what is God's house now?
God's house is us.
Me. So, I am the house of prayer. You see the curiosity of the language. So that's why we're asked to pray, as well as pray continually, is that we are a house of prayer. We offer prayers before God. When we're together, we offer prayers. And so the whole picture is this is the house of prayer. Kind of an interesting way of looking at the temple as well as ourselves. And that's our Luke account. Any other thought before we work into John? Now, John offers an interim period, and we're only going to introduce it because we've only got about 5 minutes. But we have, after the temple is cleansed and Jesus slips away, we have an interesting event transpire that John records for us. Now, it's also interesting, John records nothing about this cleansing, nothing about the fig tree, nothing about any of those events. But he does settle on an event, these events in chapter 12, which start out with the Greeks coming to Jesus. We can introduce it with just the first few verses here. Now, among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified." So here we have some Greeks. What are they? We don't know what they are. They may be proselytes. That appears to maybe be the case. But they're Greeks. Some commentators, there's actually a couple of historical writers that say that these Greeks may have wanted Jesus to come visit their home country. I don't know anything, there's nothing in Scripture that would suggest that. They may have witnessed the cleansing of the temple. If they had witnessed it, they came to Jesus. There are several things of interest as we start this section. One, Jesus doesn't turn them away, because the Greeks and the rest of the world is going to be accepted into Christianity. There was an area of the temple that was dedicated to foreigners. The Greeks came to worship. We have others that could come to worship in the area where the foreigners were allowed to come. This area also appears to be where a lot of the money changing, etc., was taking place. So they sat there and watched what had transpired. They come wanting an audience. There's very little said beyond that about them except the discourse that takes place next. Not only do the Greeks get to enjoy hearing what he has to say next, but it's a great deal of teaching for the disciples about what all is transpiring coming up to Jerusalem, which is introduced by this verse 23. Also, this verse 23 offers something else to us. We have seen a couple of times in our lessons where it talks about when Jesus is glorified. If you're studying through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I've tried to point them out each time we find them. Several times whenever we look at a passage and it says when he's glorified, such and such will take place. Notice we allow the Scripture to define his glorification. When is he glorified? It's the death, burial, and resurrection. It's not the return. Now, the reason why I say that is a lot of times when you're reading Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and it says glorified, and you read a commentator of some kind or another, even preachers will preach the fact it's when he comes back. Not the case. If it uses the word glorified, when is he glorified? You see? It's the resurrection. That's his glorification, always. So when you're reading through and you're studying some of the passages, now recognize some of the passages may well be about him returning. I'm not arguing that. There's one in Matthew 24 when we get there that we're going to talk about his return. I'm not going to debate that. But when it says he's glorified, one of the passages we were dealing with is when he separates the sheep from the goats. And it says in his glorification. When did he separate the sheep from the goats then? At his resurrection, not at the end of time. Okay, so, and this passage proves that for us. It allows us to understand the fact that the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And so we have this idea. Premillennialists actually teach that the glorification will only occur when he returns. So just recognize that. We've talked quite a bit about premillennialist teaching, but his glorification, basically in most of the premillennial teaching, is that he isn't going to be glorified until he returns and sets up his kingdom. That's not teaching, of course, what this says right here. So Jesus himself recognized that he was going to be glorified, and it was going to be the death, burial, and resurrection. He also shares this with the Greeks. I find that interesting. The Pharisees and the Sadducees don't want to hear it. The people of God in Palestine don't want to hear it. He tells it to Greeks, and that's ironic. Foreigners get to hear the message that the others will not listen to. So that kind of introduces where we're going. Now we're going to have a discourse by John on light and darkness and some of the events that are going to take place. It's all going to come to play within the next 30-some verses between verse 20 and verse 50. And I'm not going to go any further because that's all I wanted to do. How about that? I ended 3 minutes early. That's scary. Huh?
You're not done yet.
I'm not done yet? Well, I think I will be. I think I'm just going to quit right there. Go ahead, David.
Well, I'm a little late, but sin has affected everything, most everything. And I was thinking if Jesus had been walking in the first garden, there have been figs on the tree.
Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting analogy. Debbie kind of brought that up a little bit too. The analogy of the fig tree and the Garden of Eden and the fruit, etc. It's just kind of an ironic thing. One thing I didn't mention, because I mentioned it last time we were studying a little bit, but I find it so ironic that Jesus talks to trees just like he talks to everything. It's all alive to him. He's part of the creation, and he refers to it. I like that also when he calms the storm. We might talk to a storm, but we don't talk to the storm like he does. We might yell at the weather or whatever, but we don't talk to it. And I'm not saying we should. If we do, they'll carry us away. But but he does, because he's the creator of it. He knows it, and he knows what it is, and how it functions and what it does, and he talks to it. The one we were talking about was that passage, if you remember with me, the one where he says, if the people don't cry out, the rocks will. And I put quite an emphasis on the fact Jesus is saying that and the question was, if they hadn't yelled out, would the rocks have done something? You know what I mean? Well, to us, rocks are dead. They're not alive. They're not even like trees. But he claims, the power of God would, of course, been involved in something like that. But I find it interesting that Jesus doesn't approach creation like we do.
He can make a mule talk. He can do anything.
And we did. We pointed out Balaam's donkey. It's but God doesn't have those restrictions. He doesn't have restrictions with trees either. And I kind of also a sideline, but I think Jesus enjoyed nature. He likes the olive garden. He likes the quiet spot. He goes up to the mountains. Because it was peaceful to him. Where the people weren't peaceful. People aren't peaceful. In that sense, he'd find a peaceful place and a quiet place. And he makes this reference even here when he cleanses the temple. Look what you've done to the temple of God. This is supposed to be a peaceful place of prayer. Instead you've made it, this. And now Tom's going to be happy because I'm going to go over time now. What does our Christian world religions look like? Go visit some of them. It's worse than a rock concert. I was watching a couple of them online the other day. It's worse than a rock concert. And we're saying this is the place of prayer and the peace with God? It doesn't make any sense. But that's our world. Everything wants to be entertained instead of study and work with it. And Now, I appreciate as much as the next person a little entertainment and singing and stuff like that. But it's the same reality of it is, where does it begin and where does it end? And what's going on inside us? It's a real question.
As far as the people are concerned, and Jesus wanting the peace and quiet, sin hasn't entered into the lives of the trees or the grass.
That's why it's so quiet. Yeah, it's been cursed, but it hadn't affected it like it has man. Yeah.
Kevin,
No.
we were talking, this has nothing to do with anything.
Okay, nothing to do with anything. Go for it.
We're done, okay.
Yes, I'm done.
But we were talking at our devotional the other day about the evolutionists say that, the fish grew the legs because it was necessary to walk on land. And this evolved into this because it was necessary to do this and that and the other. So we want to stick around for a long time and see how they work in the masks in evolution. Will we always have these automatically part of our face?
We'll probably be born with masks in a few generations.
You're right, it had nothing to do with nothing.
I told you it had nothing to do with nothing.
And on that note, I say fare thee well.
We need a lot of prayer.
Our world needs a lot of prayer. There's no doubt of that. About the time you think it's bad enough, it gets worse. Dad got an email from American in Holland that he's working with to translate this book because he had a couple of corrections.